Defense attorney Elijah Brooks thought this case would define his career, or end it. He stood in a Riverton courtroom, defending a black man accused of a violent hit-and-run, while the city's most feared prosecutor watched with a satisfied smile. To Daniel Crow, Elijah wasn't a lawyer. He was a problem that needed to be erased. But as the trial unfolded, Elijah noticed things that didn't add up. Missing minutes, altered reports, a silence too carefully arranged to be accidental. The deeper he dug, the clearer it became. The man chasing justice wasn't the prosecutor. The real criminal was already standing at the podium. And when Elijah chose to keep digging, knowing it would make him look guilty, the courtroom became a battlefield where truth and power finally collided. Before we begin, tell us in the comments, where are you watching from today? And if you believe some heroes are willing to look guilty to save the innocent, this story is for you. Riverton woke under a low ceiling of gray clouds, the kind that pressed down on the city without rain, as if the sky itself was holding its breath. The late autumn air was cold but not sharp, carrying the smell of damp concrete, exhaust fumes, and distant river water. Morning traffic moved in tired pulses, and downtown Riverton, glass towers mixed with aging brick buildings, looked like a place where ambition and disappointment had learned to coexist without speaking to each other. On the third floor of an old commercial building just off Grant Avenue, Elijah Brooks unlocked the door to his law office. The office was small, one narrow waiting area, one desk that doubled as a conference table, and a second-hand bookshelf bowed slightly under the weight of legal volumes he'd bought at auctions. The carpet was worn thin, and the heater clicked loudly before deciding whether it wanted to work. Still, Elijah paused for a moment after stepping inside, as he often did, letting himself feel the quiet pride of having a place that was his. Elijah Brooks was 28 years old, tall and lean, with a posture that suggested discipline learned early and reinforced by years of being watched. His skin was a deep brown, his hair kept short and neat, and his face carried the calm seriousness of someone who had learned that emotions, when shown too freely, were often used against him. His eyes, dark, observant, had a habit of lingering on details others ignored. He dressed simply, a navy suit that had seen too many dry cleaning cycles, a white shirt with a faint crease that never quite came out, and polished shoes he wiped down every night. He didn't look like the kind of lawyer people imagined when they thought of power. He looked like someone still earning the right to be taken seriously. Elijah set his briefcase down and was halfway through pouring coffee when his phone rang. The caller ID showed an unfamiliar number. He hesitated. New offices attracted the wrong kinds of calls, but answered anyway. "Mr. Brooks?" a male voice asked, tight and uncertain. "My name is Marcus Hale. I was told you might be willing to take my case." Elijah leaned against the desk, listening. Marcus Hale, as he soon learned, was a construction worker in his mid-30s, broad-shouldered, calloused hands, a body shaped by years of physical labor. A man who worked long hours, paid his taxes, and had never been inside a courtroom until now. He was being charged with felony hit-and-run resulting in severe bodily injury. The accusation sounded devastating. The details, at least on paper, looked simple enough to seal a conviction. A pedestrian struck late at night. Critical injuries. The driver fled. A grainy traffic camera captured a vehicle similar to Marcus's. A witness who thought they recognized his truck. Marcus's voice shook as he spoke. "I didn't run. I swear I didn't. I wasn't even there." Elijah closed his eyes briefly. He had heard versions of this before. He also knew the odds. Cases like this didn't make careers. They ended them. "I need to be honest with you," Elijah said. "This won't be easy." "I don't need easy," Marcus replied. "I need someone who will actually look." That sentence stayed with Elijah long after the call ended. By noon, the case file arrived by email, thick, dense, and disturbingly confident in its conclusions. The language was aggressive, the assumptions neatly stacked. It read less like an investigation and more like a story already decided. and at the bottom of nearly every page was the same name: Nathan Cole. Nathan Cole was Riverton's rising star prosecutor. In his early 40s, white, impeccably groomed with steel blue eyes and a smile that rarely reached them. He was tall, broad across the shoulders, always perfectly tailored. Cole had built a reputation as a man who didn't let criminals slip through cracks. In press photos, he looked composed and righteous. In person, as Elijah had once seen from across a courtroom, he carried himself like someone who believed the law was an extension of his own judgment. Cole had a habit of speaking about crime as if it were a disease, and criminals as something to be removed for the health of society. "This city has been too forgiving," Cole had once said at a press conference. "Some people don't want reform. They want chaos, and chaos needs consequences." The unspoken part never needed saying. Everyone heard it anyway. Elijah sat back in his chair, the hum of the heater filling the silence. Taking this case meant stepping directly into Cole's line of fire. His phone buzzed again. This time it was Daniel Mercer, a defense attorney 10 years his senior and one of the few people in Riverton who'd offered Elijah genuine advice when he first passed the bar. Daniel was white, balding, with a soft build and perpetually tired eyes. He practiced carefully, strategically. Surviving mattered to him. "I heard you got a call," Daniel said without greeting. "Marcus Hale." Elijah didn't deny it. "Listen," Daniel continued, lowering his voice, "don't take this personally, but you're not ready for Cole. No one your age is. He'll bury you, and he won't even lose sleep over it." "Someone has to defend him," Elijah replied. "Yes," Daniel said, "just not you, not now." Elijah thanked him and ended the call, though the warning echoed louder than the dial tone. Across town, in the newsroom of the Riverton Herald, Sarah Whitmore was staring at the same case from a very different angle. Sarah was in her early 30s, tall and slender, with sharp cheekbones and pale skin that never seemed to tan. Her auburn hair was usually pulled back into a loose knot that fell apart as the day went on. She dressed practically: dark jeans, flat shoes, jackets with deep pockets. Her eyes were quick, restless, always scanning. She wasn't loud, she wasn't warm, but she was relentless. Years earlier, Sarah had covered a corruption story involving city housing contracts, an investigation that had ended abruptly when a key source died under suspicious circumstances. The case was buried. No one was charged. Since then, Sarah trusted documents more than people, and silence more than official statements. What caught her attention about the Hale case wasn't the crime itself. It was how little information was publicly available. Files sealed early, witness names withheld, surveillance footage described but never released. "Too clean," she muttered, scrolling through the docket. When she saw Nathan Cole's name, her jaw tightened. Back in his office, Elijah stared at the case file as the city outside darkened. He thought of Marcus's voice, of Daniel's warning, of the way Cole framed justice like punishment was the goal, not the means. He picked up his pen and wrote a single word on a yellow legal pad. Why? Why this speed? Why this certainty? The office lights flickered once, then steadied. Elijah made his decision. He called Marcus Hale back before the sun fully disappeared behind Riverton's skyline. "I'll take your case," he said. There was a pause on the other end, then a breath that sounded like relief mixed with fear. "Thank you," Marcus said quietly. Elijah hung up, unaware that by accepting the case, he had just stepped into a storm that would test not only his career, but his life. Outside, the clouds finally broke. Not with rain, but with a deeper gray settling over Riverton like a warning no one could yet read. The Riverton County Courthouse rose from the sidewalk like a slab of cold authority, all limestone columns and darkened windows that reflected nothing of the city around it. Inside, the air smelled faintly of floor polish and old paper. The morning docket moved with mechanical efficiency, but when the bailiff called State v. Hale, the room shifted. Shoulders straightened, whispers died, and a familiar tension settled into the benches. Nathan Cole entered first, unhurried, carrying himself with the confidence of a man who had never doubted how a room would respond to him. He wore a charcoal suit cut perfectly to his frame, his silver tie clipped with understated precision. His hair was neatly parted, dark with just enough gray at the temples to suggest experience. Cole's expression was composed, almost pleasant, but his eyes, cool and assessing, moved across the gallery as if cataloging weaknesses. He nodded to a few uniformed officers, ignored the defense table, and took his place with the assurance of someone who believed the outcome was already written. At the opposite table sat Elijah Brooks, posture straight, hands folded lightly over a slim binder. The suit he wore was the same navy one from the day before, pressed again, but no newer. He looked younger here, framed by the courtroom's severity, but there was steadiness in the way he breathed, in the way his gaze stayed forward. Beside him sat Marcus Hale, broad-shouldered and rigid, his work-rough hands clasped together as if holding himself in place. Marcus's face was drawn, eyes rimmed with red from a night without sleep, yet he did not look away from the judge's bench. The judge entered. Judge Eleanor Price, a woman in her late 50s with short iron-gray hair and sharp features that suggested a lifetime of keeping order. She wore her robe like armor, her movements economical, her expression neutral to the point of austerity. Judge Price was known for efficiency, not patience, and certainly not indulgence. Cole rose when addressed, his voice filling the room with practiced ease. He spoke of the crime as if narrating a cautionary tale. A violent hit-and-run. A citizen left broken on cold asphalt. A driver who fled rather than face responsibility. He spoke of accountability, of order, of the burden society bore when reckless individuals treated the law as optional. He never named race, not once, but his phrasing drew invisible lines. These people, patterns of behavior, communities plagued by disregard for the rules that keep us safe. Marcus shifted, jaw tightening. Elijah felt it and placed a hand lightly on the table, not a touch, just a presence. When Cole finished, he allowed a brief silence to linger, the kind that implied consensus. Then he sat, folding his hands, eyes flicking toward Elijah with a look that was almost curious. Elijah stood. His voice was calm, measured, and deliberately restrained. He did not mirror Cole's rhetoric. Instead, he spoke of timelines, of minutes that mattered, of the prosecution's own report stating that the alleged vehicle left the scene at 11:42 p.m., while a separate dispatch log recorded the first emergency call at 11:39. 3 minutes that did not align. He asked how a vehicle could flee before the incident was reported. He asked why the traffic camera footage cited by the state had no verified timestamp. He did not accuse, he questioned. Judge Price listened, pen tapping once against her legal pad. When Elijah finished, she looked down at the file, then back up. "At this stage," she said, voice flat, "the court finds these points insufficient to undermine probable cause." She did not invite further argument. The gavel tapped once. The moment was over. Cole's mouth curved slightly, a victory so small it barely needed acknowledging. In the back row, Sarah Whitmore watched without taking notes. She rarely did during live proceedings. Sarah preferred to absorb first, record later. She sat with her legs crossed, jacket draped over the back of the bench, auburn hair pulled into a loose knot already slipping free. Her expression gave nothing away, but her eyes were sharp, tracking Cole's phrasing, the judge's impatience, the way the prosecution's timeline slid past scrutiny. Sarah had learned years ago that the most important details were often dismissed in open court and buried quietly afterward. After the hearing adjourned, the hallway filled with motion. Lawyers clustered, voices low. Cole spoke briefly with a uniformed officer, his tone relaxed. When he passed Elijah, he paused just long enough to offer a polite smile. "Counsel?" he said. Nothing more. The word felt like a challenge. Elijah gathered his papers and turned to Marcus. "We expected this," he said quietly. "It doesn't change what we do next." Marcus nodded, though his shoulders remained tense. "He talked like I was already guilty. He talks like that about everyone," Elijah replied. "He did not say everyone like you. He didn't need to." Outside, the sky had cleared slightly, the clouds thinning to a pale, wintry blue. Sarah stepped into the cold and pulled her phone from her pocket. She had already requested the accident report the night before, citing public records access. It had arrived an hour ago. Now, leaning against the courthouse wall, she scrolled again, slower this time. The report listed the time of compilation as 12:05 a.m. That alone meant nothing, until Sarah noticed the metadata. The document had been modified at 1:17 a.m. Revised. Quietly, she frowned and pulled up the version history. The original timestamp, 11:58 p.m., was gone, replaced by the later entry. Someone had touched the file after it was finalized. Sarah exhaled slowly. This wasn't proof. Not yet. But it was motive-shaped. Across town, a call went unanswered. Linda Perez, a convenience store clerk in her early 40s, sat at her kitchen table staring at her phone as it vibrated. Linda was short, thick-set, with tired eyes and hands that trembled slightly when she was nervous. She had been the closest civilian witness to the accident, standing outside her store when she heard the impact. The night it happened, she had told police she saw headlights speed away, but she had never been sure of the make. Yesterday, a man in a suit had visited her at work. Polite, insistent. He had suggested that testifying would be stressful, that the case was already clear, that mistakes could follow someone for years. Linda let the call go to voicemail. Back in his office, Elijah replayed the hearing in his mind while reviewing the file again. The gaps were still there, unchanged by the judge's dismissal. He underlined the same lines, circled the same times. Outside his window, traffic moved steadily indifferent. The law moved slower. That evening, Sarah emailed him. Just a subject line and a sentence. Accident report shows signs of post-submission edits. No explanation logged. She left her number. Elijah read it twice, then once more. He didn't reply immediately. He stared at the city lights and felt, for the first time, the faint sense that this case was not just difficult, but dangerous. He picked up his phone and typed a response. "Let's talk." Elijah Brooks worked best at night. When the city quieted and the hum of traffic softened into a distant tide, details grew louder. He sat at his desk with the file open, sleeves rolled, the lamp angled low so the paper glowed and the rest of the room fell away. He read not for story, but for friction, where facts resisted each other, where the record felt smoothed by a hand that didn't belong. The vehicle description sat at the center of his attention. The report named a dark pickup, late model with a dent on the rear quarter panel. That dent mattered. It had become the prosecution's visual anchor. Elijah pulled the supplemental photos again and held them up side by side with the witness statement. The angles were wrong. The dent, if it existed at all, was shallow in one image, pronounced in another. The paint scuffs were described as silver, then gray. It was subtle, the kind of inconsistency that could pass unnoticed, unless you were looking for it. He pulled up the registration data Marcus had provided. Same make, same year range. Not the same trim. The tail light assembly differed by a few centimeters. Most people wouldn't catch it. Elijah did. He made a note, circled it twice, then once more in red. Misalignment number 1. The second friction lay deeper, buried where fewer eyes traveled. Elijah requested the victim's vehicle telemetry, what the police had labeled casually as non-contributory. The data came back late, fragmented and strangely clean. The speed curve flattened too early. There was a gap, 3 minutes missing, right where the impact should have left a digital bruise. Elijah leaned back, listening to the heater tick. Black boxes didn't forget minutes without a reason. Power loss, manual interruption, or a file overwrite. None of those were accidental. He wrote another note. Gap aligns with report revision window. His jaw tightened. Across town, Sarah Whitmore moved through records like a swimmer through cold water, steady, controlled, conserving breath. She had changed locations twice since leaving the courthouse, not out of fear, but habit. Years earlier, after the housing contract story collapsed, she'd learned that persistence invited attention. Attention invited pressure. Sarah sat now in the back corner of a small insurance office lobby, laptop balanced on her knees, coffee untouched. The clerk had stepped away. On her screen, a claims database scrolled past names and policy numbers. She filtered by vehicle type, then by year, then by coverage anomalies. One entry flickered into view and held. A truck matching the prosecution's description. Same model, same color range. Owned by Evan Cole. Sarah paused. Evan Cole was Nathan Cole's younger brother. She knew the name from a society page years back. Charity galas, fundraisers, a brief mention of a family business venture. Evan was mid-30s, athletic build, clean-cut in photos, the kind of man who smiled easily and never looked directly at the camera, as if aware of how images could be used. The policy was active. The address matched a suburb 10 miles from the accident site. The coverage included collision repairs completed 2 weeks after the incident. Sarah felt a chill that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. She saved copies, encrypted them, and sent a brief message to Elijah. Found insurance record for similar vehicle owned by Prosecutor's brother. Timing suspicious. She hesitated, then added, "Call me, not text." The message sent, Sarah closed her laptop and stood. As she crossed the lobby, she caught her reflection in the glass. Tall, pale, eyes alert. She checked the street before stepping out. A gray sedan idled across the way. When she turned left, it stayed put. When she turned right, it pulled away. Coincidence, maybe. She took the long route back. That night, Elijah received the telemetry explanation he'd requested. It was thin. Data corruption due to sensor fault. No technician's signature, no diagnostic report. He forwarded it to a contact he trusted. Miles Rourke, a former automotive engineer turned private consultant. Miles was late 40s, compact, with wireframe glasses and a habit of speaking slowly, as if words were parts he needed to fit together just right. He disliked assumptions. Elijah liked him for that. Miles replied before midnight. Sensor faults don't erase contiguous minutes. They scramble values. This looks curated. Elijah closed his eyes. The word settled heavy. The next morning, Sarah noticed the phone before she noticed the noise. A faint click when she answered calls, a delay when she hung up. She ran a diagnostic app. It flagged anomalies and recommended a reset. She didn't reset. She powered down, removed the SIM, and wrapped the phone in a scarf before tucking it into her bag. Years ago, she might have laughed at herself. Now she didn't. She borrowed a colleague's desk phone to make a call. "I think I'm being monitored," she told Elijah when he answered. Her voice stayed level. "Nothing dramatic, just enough to be noticed." "Then we slow down," Elijah said. "And we don't keep everything in one place." They met that afternoon in a public library branch where silence was enforced by architecture and habit. The building smelled of paper and lemon cleaner. Elijah brought copies. Sarah brought originals on a drive she wore on a chain beneath her shirt. They sat apart, communicating in notes passed between books. The vehicle details aligned uncomfortably well. The insurance repair date fell 3 days after the accident. The parts replaced matched the damage pattern in the photos the prosecution had circulated. Sarah underlined a line item twice. Rear quarter panel. Replacement. Elijah wrote beside it. Different trim. Same damage. As they stood to leave, a man near the exit rose too quickly. He was tall, broad, with close-cropped hair and a jacket that didn't belong indoors. His eyes lingered a fraction too long. Sarah didn't look back. She adjusted her stride and let the crowd absorb her. Outside, she took a different bus than planned. That evening, Elijah visited Marcus. The holding room was plain, fluorescent lit, the kind of place that flattened time. Marcus looked smaller there, shoulders hunched, eyes searching Elijah's face for news. Elijah told him only what he could. That things didn't line up, that they were working, that patience mattered. "I keep thinking," Marcus said quietly, "if I hadn't taken that route home." Elijah shook his head. "You didn't do this," he said, "and we'll prove it, step by step." Marcus nodded, though fear lived in the space behind his eyes. Elijah saw it and felt the familiar anger rise, the kind that demanded action but punished haste. When Elijah returned to his office, he found the door slightly ajar. Nothing was missing, nothing was disturbed. That was worse. He closed it carefully, checking the lock twice, then once more. He moved the files, split copies, separate locations. He backed up everything offline. Paranoia, perhaps? Prudence, certainly. Late that night, Sarah walked her dog, an aging border collie named Ash. Salt and pepper muzzle, intelligent eyes dulled by years but still watchful. Ash moved slowly, hips stiff, loyal to a fault. Sarah had adopted him after the housing case, after the long months when sleep came in fragments and silence pressed too hard. Ash didn't ask questions. He stayed. Halfway down the block, Sarah heard footsteps match her pace. She stopped. Ash stopped. The steps stopped too. She turned. No one there. She waited a full minute before moving again. Heart steady, breath controlled. At home, she set Ash's bowl, then opened a notebook and wrote by hand. Names, dates, distances. Paper couldn't be tapped. Not easily. Near midnight, Elijah received a message from Miles. If the box was accessed manually, someone had physical access to the vehicle. That narrows your field. Elijah stared at the ceiling and counted the seconds until sleep claimed him. By morning, the shape of the case had changed. Not resolved, never that, but sharpened. A vehicle that didn't quite match. A black box that forgot 3 minutes. An insurance record that pointed sideways instead of straight. And a sense, growing steadily, that someone powerful had reasons to keep the story simple. Elijah dressed and stepped into the day, aware now that the ground beneath the case was not just uneven, it was shifting. And somewhere close, unseen, pressure was being applied. The courtroom felt smaller this time, as if the walls had leaned in overnight. Morning light filtered through the high windows in pale bands that never quite reached the floor, leaving the center of the room in a permanent half-shadow. Elijah Brooks stood at the defense table with his notes aligned and his breathing slow, aware that every movement would be read for weakness. Across from him, Nathan Cole adjusted his cufflinks with deliberate calm, the picture of authority preparing to be challenged, and irritated that it had to be. Judge Eleanor Price entered and took her seat without ceremony. Her face betrayed nothing. Efficiency ruled this room and impatience was its currency. Elijah rose when called. He did not grandstand. He did not accuse. He spoke plainly, requesting a renewed investigation into the collision based on newly identified inconsistencies, vehicle trim discrepancies, contradictory damage descriptions, and an unexplained gap in the victim's vehicle telemetry. He emphasized process, not motive. "At this stage," he said, voice even, "the record does not establish the identity of the driver beyond reasonable doubt. The state's narrative presumes certainty that the evidence itself does not support." The words hung for a heartbeat longer than expected. Cole's jaw tightened. Cole stood before the judge could respond. He did not ask permission, he assumed it. "Your Honor," he said, smiling faintly, "this is a familiar tactic. Counsel Brooks is attempting to reframe a defendant with clear culpability as a victim of circumstance. It's a well-worn maneuver. Confuse the facts, question the system, delay accountability." He turned slightly toward the gallery, voice carrying. "We see it often. A refusal to accept responsibility dressed up as advocacy." Elijah met his gaze and held it. Cole's eyes flicked away first. Judge Price listened, pen still. "The court will take the request under advisement," she said at last, already signaling closure. "But I remind counsel that speculation is not evidence. We proceed as scheduled." Cole's smile widened by a fraction. He leaned in Elijah's direction as he returned to his seat. "Careful," he murmured, just loud enough to be heard. "Some arguments make you look like you're defending chaos." The hearing ended without fireworks, which felt worse. Outside the courtroom, Cole spoke easily with a cluster of officers, laughter light, posture relaxed. Power wore comfort well. Elijah left with his file tucked close, the city's noise rising to meet him. He felt watched, not in the dramatic sense, but in the way pressure makes itself known by narrowing options. He returned to his office with the intention of reorganizing the materials he and Sarah had split between locations. The door was closed when he arrived. The lock was intact. Inside, the room looked the same until it didn't. The top drawer of his desk stood open. He moved slowly, scanning for signs. The file folders were aligned, but the thickness was wrong. He counted. One binder missing. Not everything. Just enough. The insurance printouts. The repair invoices. The copies that pointed sideways. Elijah sat and closed his eyes, the hum of the building filling the space. A message delivered quietly was louder than a threat shouted. He took inventory, documenting what remained, noting timestamps. He did not call the police. He photographed the drawer, the desk, the door frame. Then he locked the remaining files in a cabinet and carried the most sensitive pages out with him, hidden between legal textbooks no one ever borrowed. Across town, Sarah Whitmore drove with both hands light on the wheel, windows down despite the chill. She preferred to feel the road. Her car was older, reliable, unremarkable. She had learned long ago that attention favored the conspicuous. Ash, her border collie, lay curled on the back seat, muzzle gray, eyes tracking motion with lazy vigilance. The dog was 12 now, hips stiff, loyalty absolute. He had learned to nap through Sarah's long silences. Sarah slowed as she approached an intersection she crossed every day. The light turned yellow. She pressed the brake. The pedal sank. There was no resistance, just a sickening softness underfoot. Time narrowed. Sarah swerved instinctively, steering into the empty right lane, pumping the brake as the car rolled through the red. A horn blared. Tires screamed. She guided the car to the curb and killed the engine, hands shaking only after the danger passed. Ash whined once, then settled. Sarah sat still, counting breaths. She knew cars. She knew the feel of mechanical failure. This wasn't wear. This was absence. She didn't call anyone from the car. She walked the rest of the way home, Ash limping patiently beside her. In her kitchen, she poured water, hands steady now, and made 2 calls from a landline she kept for emergencies. One to a mechanic she trusted, one to Elijah. "They cut the brake line," she said when he answered. No drama. Just fact. Elijah closed his office door with care. "Are you safe?" "Yes, shaken. Not surprised." They agreed on immediate changes. No predictable routes. No solo meetings. No digital trails for sensitive material. Sarah moved the documents she carried to a safe deposit box under a name that wasn't hers. Elijah arranged for a colleague to hold sealed copies in a locked cabinet off-site. Trust, split 3 ways, became strategy. That night, Elijah slept lightly. The city outside his window sounded different now. Every siren a question. He dreamed of paper dissolving into water, words bleeding away before he could read them. The next morning, he filed a formal notice documenting the missing materials without alleging a culprit. The record mattered. Even silence left footprints. At the courthouse, Cole passed him in the hall and paused, eyes flicking to Elijah's briefcase. "Busy day?" he asked pleasantly. Elijah returned the look, calm. "Always." So Cole nodded, satisfied with something unspoken, and moved on. Sarah met her mechanic that afternoon. Tom Alvarez was short, wiry, with grease permanently embedded beneath his nails, and a gentleness that came from fixing what others broke. He didn't ask many questions. He showed her the line, clean-cut, precise. "This wasn't road damage," he said simply. Sarah took photos and paid cash. She did not linger. By evening, the story had narrowed. The courtroom had closed ranks. The pressure had escalated from rhetoric to action. Elijah sat at his desk and wrote a single sentence on a fresh pad. "When power feels threatened, it reveals itself." He locked the office and stepped into the street. The sky bruised purple over Riverton. Somewhere nearby, a siren wailed and faded. He did not look back. The rain came softly that morning, the kind that polished the streets without announcing itself. Riverton looked briefly honest under it, brick darkened, glass rinsed clean, reflections steady instead of fractured. Elijah Brooks crossed Grant Avenue with his collar turned up, carrying nothing that mattered in his briefcase and everything that did in his head. He started with Marcus. The alibi had always been there, half seen, dismissed because it didn't fit the story the state wanted to tell. Elijah sat across from Marcus Hale in a small interview room that smelled faintly of disinfectant and old coffee. Marcus looked tired but present, shoulders still broad, hands still bearing the scars of work. He spoke carefully, as if every word cost him something. The night of the accident, Marcus had been at a job site on the riverfront. An emergency repair called in late. He'd clocked out after midnight. The company's digital log showed it. The foreman's entry matched. The problem was proximity. The site was close enough that the state argued Marcus could have left, driven fast, and returned unnoticed. Elijah didn't argue theory. He asked for proof. The proof came quietly. A time-stamped access badge. Marcus had used it to re-enter the site minutes after the accident occurred across town. The system logged entry and exit automatically. No edits, no gaps. Elijah felt the click of a mechanism aligning. He requested the server audit. It confirmed the badge record hadn't been altered. He sat back, letting the relief settle just long enough to become resolve. This didn't end the case. It changed its shape. The second piece arrived by way of patience. A private security camera 2 blocks from the intersection, owned by a small import shop that closed early, had been overlooked. The footage wasn't part of the municipal grid. It lived on a dusty DVR behind a counter cluttered with receipts. The owner, an older man with nicotine-stained fingers and a habit of apologizing for everything, had kept it because no one had asked for it. Elijah watched the clip twice, then a third time. At 11:41 p.m., a vehicle streaked past the frame, dark, low, moving too fast for the wet street. The tail lights flared red as it cut the corner. It wasn't Marcus's truck. The profile was wrong. Lower, wider. A sedan, not a pickup. The plate was unreadable, but the movement told a story the prosecution's narrative couldn't absorb. Elijah saved the footage to 2 drives and sealed one in an envelope he addressed by hand. Across town, Sarah Whitmore followed a different thread. She had learned to ask questions sideways. The first responder to arrive at the scene that night had been an EMT named Caleb Dunn, late 20s, lanky, with a nervous energy that bled into his posture. In his original report, Caleb had described debris patterns that suggested a sedan's bumper height, not a truck's. That line had vanished in the final version. Sarah found Caleb at a training facility outside the city, a place that smelled of rubber mats and stale sweat. He looked thinner than his photo, hair cut close, eyes darting toward the door as if expecting someone to walk in and end the conversation. "I wrote what I saw," he said quietly, fingers twisting a paper cup. "Then a supervisor called me in. Said I'd confused things, said I should trust the investigation." Sarah didn't press. She listened. That was her strength. She let silence do the heavy lifting. Caleb exhaled. "They told me changing it would save time, save trouble." "Whose?" Sarah asked. He didn't answer. He didn't have to. Sarah explained who she was without dramatics. Tall, pale, auburn hair pulled back, eyes steady. She told him she'd been doing this long enough to know the cost of speaking and the cost of staying quiet. She didn't promise protection she couldn't deliver. She promised accuracy. Caleb agreed to give a sworn statement. Off the record for now. His hands shook as he signed, but his voice steadied with each sentence. He looked relieved when it was done, like someone who had finally set down a weight. That afternoon, Sarah met Elijah in a public place chosen for its ordinariness, a grocery store cafe with bad coffee and fluorescent lighting that made everyone look the same. They sat apart, trading folded notes between trips to the counter. Law and journalism moved differently, but here they converged. Marcus's badge record, the private camera footage, Caleb's statement. 3 lines that crossed at a point the prosecution couldn't defend. They spoke briefly, quietly. "We can't drip this," Sarah said. "If we do, they'll smear the pieces." Elijah nodded. "We move together." They agreed on sequence without needing to spell it out. Elijah would file a motion with exhibits sealed, forcing the court to acknowledge the contradictions. Sarah would prepare her story, timed, sourced, corroborated. No speculation, no adjectives, just facts aligned until denial became implausible. As dusk fell, Sarah returned home to Ash waiting at the door, tail thumping once against the wall. The old border collie watched her with cloudy patience, then followed her to the desk where she spread her notes. She scratched behind his ears, grounding herself in the familiar. Years ago, after the housing story collapsed, she'd learned that routines kept fear from becoming habit. Elijah stayed late at his office, drafting with precision. He wrote as if someone hostile would read every line, because they would. He cited timestamps, not feelings. He attached the badge audit, the unaltered metadata, the private camera clip. He referenced the EMT statement without naming it publicly. He made it impossible to ignore without revealing why. When he finished, he printed 2 copies and signed both. One went into a locked cabinet, the other into his bag, which he kept on his shoulder even as he locked the door. They spoke once more that night, briefly. "This puts us in the light," Sarah said. "That's the point," Elijah replied. The rain stopped. Riverton's streets steamed faintly as if releasing something held too long. For the first time since the case began, the truth felt less like a theory and more like a structure. Standing, visible, demanding to be acknowledged. They knew the risks hadn't vanished. They had only changed shape. But for now, that was enough. The courtroom was full before the doors officially opened, a low, restless murmur rippling through the benches like static before a storm. Riverton's county court had seen spectacle before, but this felt different, tight, anticipatory, as if the room itself sensed a reversal approaching. Elijah Brooks stood at the defense table with his exhibits arranged in deliberate order, the paper edges aligned, the drives labeled in black ink. He wore the same navy suit, freshly pressed, his expression composed. Across the aisle, Nathan Cole sat with an ease that bordered on indulgence, shoulders squared, chin lifted, a faint confidence still clinging to him like a tailored coat. Judge Eleanor Price entered and took her seat. Her eyes swept the room once, measuring the temperature, then settled on the docket. "We are here on the defense's motion and the state's response," she said. "Mr. Brooks?" Elijah rose. He did not rush. He began with the timeline, clean, factual, anchored. He introduced the first exhibit, the private security camera footage. The screen flickered to life. A sedan streaked through the frame, low and fast, tail lights flaring as it cut the corner on wet pavement. Elijah paused the clip at the frame where the profile was unmistakable. "This vehicle," he said evenly, "does not match my client's truck. Different height, different wheelbase, different damage pattern." Cole shifted. The movement was small, but it rippled. Elijah moved to the second exhibit, the alibi. He presented Marcus Hale's access badge audit, the server verification, the unaltered metadata. He walked the court through minutes and seconds, through entries that could not coexist with the prosecution's theory. "At the moment, the state alleges Mr. Hale fled the scene," Elijah said. "The system records him entering a secured site across town. This record is automatic. It has not been edited." Judge Price leaned forward, pen stilled. Elijah introduced the third exhibit, the EMT statement. He did not name Caleb Dunn aloud at first. He described the observation, bumper height, debris scatter, then submitted the sworn statement under seal. "This account was changed after the fact," Elijah said, "at the instruction of a supervisor." He let the implication rest without embellishment. Cole rose sharply. "Objection," he said. "Speculation." "Overruled," Judge Price replied, eyes still on the documents. "Proceed." Elijah turned to the final set of exhibits. "Now the insurance records," he said. He presented the policy, the repair invoice, the date. He named the owner. A murmur moved through the gallery. "This vehicle," Elijah continued, "belongs to Evan Cole, the prosecutor's brother. Repairs were made days after the incident, consistent with the damage captured on the private camera." Cole's face hardened. "Your Honor," Elijah did not look at him. "The state built its case by narrowing the field until only my client remained," he said. "But the evidence widens it again, and when it does, it points here." He gestured, not theatrically but clearly, toward the prosecution table. Judge Price raised a hand. "Mr. Cole," she said, voice controlled, "you will remain seated." Elijah finished with restraint. He did not accuse in florid language. He assembled facts until they formed a shape the room could recognize. "The collision occurred," he said. "The driver fled. The evidence shows it was not Marcus Hale. The evidence shows the investigation was altered. And the evidence shows a motive to redirect scrutiny." Silence held. At that moment, phones across the room vibrated. Reporters glanced down. Sarah Whitmore's story went live. Sarah was not in the gallery. She stood 2 blocks away in the newsroom, tall and still, auburn hair pulled back, eyes on the screen as the headline settled into place. Private footage, edited reports, and a prosecutor's family tie. Questions in Riverton hit and run. The article was spare and relentless. Documents embedded, sources named. No adjectives to hide behind. Back in the courtroom, Cole stood despite the judge's order. "This is an ambush," he said, voice rising. "A media stunt designed to poison the proceedings." Judge Price's gaze sharpened. "Sit down, Mr. Cole." Cole did not. He reached for his papers, knocking a folder to the floor. The sound broke the spell. 2 uniformed officers entered from the side door. They were county investigators, not bailiffs. Their presence shifted the balance instantly. The lead investigator, a broad-shouldered woman in her 40s with cropped hair and a face set by years of unglamorous work, approached the bench and spoke quietly. Judge Price listened, nodded once. "Mr. Cole," the judge said, voice firm now, "you are to step away from the table." Cole laughed, short and incredulous. "This is absurd." The investigator placed a hand on his arm. Cole pulled back. The room held its breath. "You are under arrest," the investigator said clearly, "for obstruction of justice, evidence tampering, and felony hit and run." The words landed like a dropped weight. Cole's face drained, then flushed. He looked around as if the room had betrayed him. "You can't," he began. The cuffs clicked shut. Marcus Hale exhaled, a sound that seemed to come from the floor of his lungs. Elijah sat slowly, the adrenaline ebbing, hands steady on the table. He did not smile. As Cole was led away, Judge Price addressed the room. "The record will reflect the developments of this hearing," she said. "The charges against Mr. Hale are dismissed pending formal review. Court is adjourned." The gavel struck once. Outside, cameras flashed. Sarah watched the courthouse doors from across the street, Ash at her heel, the old dog's tail wagging once as if marking the moment. She closed her laptop and let herself breathe. Elijah stepped into the daylight, the city loud and alive. The truth had not just been argued. It had been seen. Morning arrived without ceremony, the kind that didn't ask permission. Sunlight spilled across the courthouse steps and lingered there, warming stone that had known too many cold mornings. Riverton looked different in that light. Less defensive, more human. The flags moved lazily. The city breathed. Inside Courtroom B, the benches were full again, but the tension had changed its pitch. It was quieter now, the charged silence of waiting for an ending rather than bracing for impact. Marcus Hale sat beside Elijah Brooks, shoulders still broad but no longer rigid, hands resting open on his knees. He wore a clean shirt borrowed from a friend, the creases sharp, his eyes steady. He looked like a man who had learned how fragile the ground could be and chose to stand anyway. Judge Eleanor Price entered and took her seat. The room rose, then settled. She glanced down at the file, thinner now, stripped of its false weight, and spoke with a clarity that cut through weeks of noise. Based on the evidence presented, corroborated by independent records and sworn testimony, she said, this court finds Marcus Hale not guilty on all counts. The words landed cleanly. No flourish, no delay. Marcus exhaled and bowed his head. He did not shout. He did not cry. Relief came to him as a physical thing. His shoulders dropped, his jaw unclenched, his hands trembled once and stilled. Elijah placed a hand on his arm, brief and grounding. The sound that followed, applause, was not permitted, but it rose anyway, a soft rustle of approval that the bailiff allowed to fade on its own. Outside, cameras waited. Reporters crowded the steps, voices overlapping. Elijah moved through them carefully, answering only what mattered. He spoke of evidence, of process, of restraint. He did not speak of vengeance. When asked what it felt like to win, he said, "This wasn't a win. It was a correction." Across the plaza, Sarah Whitmore watched from the edge of the crowd, notebook tucked under her arm. She looked as she always did, tall, pale auburn hair pulled back, posture attentive rather than celebratory. Years ago, after a story collapsed under pressure and silence, she had learned to temper joy with endurance. Today, though, there was something lighter in her eyes. Her phone buzzed. An editor's message, brief and disbelieving. Pulitzer Committee called. "Congratulations." Sarah closed her eyes for a moment and let the word pass through her without changing her pace. Awards were acknowledgments, not endings. She had work to do. In the days that followed, Riverton moved. Old files came down from shelves. Names resurfaced. The district attorney's office announced a review of cases prosecuted under Nathan Cole's tenure. A temporary special counsel, Margaret Lynn, a compact woman in her early 60s with iron gray hair and a reputation for precision, was appointed to oversee the process. She spoke softly, wrote decisively, and did not grant interviews. Elijah returned to his office and found it changed by attention he had not sought. New clients waited in the hall. Some were grateful. Some were wary. He treated them the same. He hired an assistant, Renee Carter, a recent law graduate with keen eyes and a careful manner. Renee was petite, meticulous, and carried herself like someone who understood how easily mistakes multiplied. She asked good questions and listened harder than she spoke. Marcus went home. He slept through the night for the first time in weeks. He returned to work, hands steady again on familiar tools. He walked the riverfront in the evenings and watched light gather and leave. When reporters called, he declined politely. Freedom did not require narration. Sarah's days filled with interviews that had been waiting years to happen. She wrote about cases reopened, sentences reconsidered, lives bent by shortcuts now examined under daylight. She did not editorialize. She documented. Ash lay at her feet while she worked, old body curved, tail thumping once when she stood to refill her coffee. The dog's eyes had clouded further, but he followed her everywhere, faithful to a fault. One morning, Sarah received a letter written in careful block print. It was from Caleb Dunn, the EMT. He thanked her for listening. He had transferred to a different county. He slept better now. Weeks passed. The city adjusted. The courthouse steps saw fewer cameras, more ordinary feet. On a clear morning, Elijah and Sarah stood at the base of those steps, coffee in hand, watching the sun climb. Neither spoke for a while. The silence was companionable, earned. "Do you ever worry," Sarah asked finally, "that it just shifts? That power learns and hides better?" Elijah nodded. "It does," he said. "That's why the work doesn't stop." They stood there, not as victors, but as witnesses, to what happened when truth was allowed to finish its sentence. Above them, the light held. At the end of this story, the lesson is simple and human. Justice does not always arrive loudly. Sometimes it comes quietly, carried by people who choose to keep looking when it would be easier to stop. In everyday life, we all face moments when silence feels safer than truth, when walking away seems more practical than standing firm. This story reminds us that real change often begins with small, steady choices to do what is right, even when no one is watching and the cost feels heavy. You do not have to be a lawyer or a journalist to make a difference. You make a difference when you speak honestly, when you protect someone being treated unfairly, and when you refuse to let fear decide your actions. Truth may move slowly, but it has a way of reaching the light. If this story touched you, please share it with someone who might need hope today. Leave a comment below and tell us what part spoke to your heart. If you believe that justice and truth still matter, consider subscribing to the channel so we can continue telling stories that remind us of that. May God bless you and your family, protect you in times of trial, and give you the courage to stand for what is right. If you believe in that blessing, write Amen in the comments.